Hello and welcome aboard to the 24th edition of Ask the Governor with Governor John Bel Edwards. 877-217-5757 is your number. And if you would like to talk to the governor, you have a full hour to get in. He takes all comers, so the phone lines do get tight at times. So you need to get in if you'd like to talk with Governor John Bel Edwards. Once again, 877-217-5757. I'm Jim Inkster, your moderator. And when we last talked to the governor a month ago, you were relatively optimistic about the special session to come, and then, boom, things didn't turn out the way you wanted them to. What happened?
Well, they didn't, and that's unfortunate. And it's not the first time. We had a fiscal session last year, which was the last scheduled fiscal session before the fiscal cliff hits, and not a single bill then made it out of the House of Representatives that addressed the cliff. And so we called a special session this year, and the reason we did that is the regular session is non-fiscal, so the Constitution does not allow us to take up instruments that would actually address the fiscal cliff. We had the special session last month, and it was sort of deja vu all over again. Not a single bill that was designed to address the cliff got out of the House of Representatives, and it's unfortunate. And by the way, it just shouldn't have happened that way, because there were a considerable number of folks, Democrats and Republicans, who agreed that we need to fix the cliff and that we need to do it in February. And they really agreed on a large number of revenue items. But at the end of the day, the leadership in the House of Representatives just wasn't there to bring people together and make sure that poison pill amendments didn't get put onto certain instruments and that they actually achieved the consensus. And at the end of the day, it broke down. And as a result, we have a lot of uncertainty and turbulence in Louisiana today that we should not have. Credit rating agencies are watching us, and they are not impressed at all. We have parents out there of kids who are on TOPS, or maybe they're graduating seniors, and they don't know the degree to which TOPS is going to be there in the fall, and that's creating uncertainty. Our ability to keep our partner hospitals open is also in jeopardy. And now, I remain optimistic we're going to get this fixed, because I think the legislature is going to have a very difficult time trying to pass a budget without addressing the cliff first. And the exercise that they're going through right now trying to craft a budget, I think will serve to wake some people up and create the sense of urgency that we need. And I do want for just a minute, Jim, to remind people what the cliff is. The fiscal cliff is not a situation like we had a couple of years ago where revenue isn't coming in as forecasted. That's not the case. It's not a situation where our expenditures are greater than we anticipated. That is not the case. So much of the revenue that was put on the books in 2015, but mostly in 2016, was short-term in nature, and it expires on June 30th. It just goes away. And in fact, that's $1.38 billion worth. My plan was to maintain $994 million of that, which would have been a net tax burden reduction in the state of Louisiana by almost $400 million. But at that level, I felt like we could fully fund TOPS, our higher education institutions, without a cut, keep our partner hospitals, fund our most critical priorities. We would still have $120 million in cuts. Ultimately, the legislature couldn't get any of that done, and so we have a challenge before us. But again, I think we're up to it. I'm going to continue working hard every single day. Unfortunately, we didn't get it done when we should, but that just makes it more important that we are successful the next time.
877-217-5757 is your number for Ask the Governor. Jerry and Gonzales, we start with you. You're on the air with Governor John Bel Edwards. Hi, Jerry.
How you doing, Governor?
I'm doing fine, Jerry. Thank you.
I've worked for several state agencies, and one of the things that, and I'm just finishing my MBA, I've noticed one of the things, there's a lot of little things falling through the cracks are being overseen improperly or incompetently, because it's costing us money, basically, because you're holding on to, like, Department of Children.
All right. Go. Let's see if we can finish your thought.
Because
We're getting some feedback. So, Jerry, I think we get the gist of what you're saying. As far as the budget, Jerry, I think has some ideas that go beyond what you have suggested. But
Yeah, and I'd like to hear from him. I wasn't sure at all where he was headed.
let's give him one more shot, Governor. Jerry, let's see if we can get you on without the feedback this time. Go ahead. Jerry, are you
Okay.
there? Yes, sir.
I was just saying that I've worked for several of the agencies, and I've been disabled.
All right, that's not going to work. So, uh, as far as the options available, we have this continuing debate about cuts versus um, revenue, and many believe that cuts have occurred so dramatically over the last decade in particular that we've cut ourselves to the point where we can't cut anymore without losing essential services. What do you think, Governor?
Well, look, I think you have to have a balanced approach, and that's what we've done since I've been governor. And there's nothing easy about it. There's nothing easy about cuts. There's nothing easy about revenue. But we've done both of those, and we've also done savings. This year, for example, but just because of Medicaid expansion alone, we're going to save a little over $300 million state general fund. But I think you have to have a balanced approach. But it is true, for example, that the state cuts general fund support for higher education in the 8 years before I became governor more than any other state in the nation. That didn't serve us well, and I don't think we should go back to doing that because economic development, investment in our state, job creation to a very large extent depends upon our commitment to higher education because people aren't going to invest their money here if we don't have educated, trained, skilled workers. That talent pipeline is critically important. So we cannot just cut our way out of this. Now, as I mentioned at the outset, even under my proposal, there was going to be almost $400 million net reduction in the tax burden in the state of Louisiana from this year to next. If we had stabilized around $994 million, which is the difference in the forecast for general fund dollars for this year as opposed to next year. So the levels of general fund would be the same. We would still have to cut $120 million out of certain programs and services because there are certain parts of our budget that go up and we don't have any control over that. So even under my proposal, there was going to be another $120 million in cuts, but those cuts would not be as wide. They would not be as deep as what's going to be required if we don't address the cliff.
Frankie in Washington Parish, you're on the air with Governor John Bel Edwards. Hi, Frankie.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Fine.
Good, good. I told the receptionist, the executive producer, that we once played football against one another. I with Franklin Demus and you with the A-Mid Warriors.
Well, I remember those games very well. They always came right around Halloween. They were always cold, and y'all normally beat us. But that didn't happen my junior year, as I recall. But go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Matter of fact, I don't know if you remember Nat Durant.
Well, I do, actually. I do remember. And by the way, your coach.
I'm gonna get to my question real
Okay.
quickly here. But while we were warming up, we were like, we want Nat. So we kicked off to you guys. Nat got the ball about the 5 yards deep in the end zone, and we never touched a finger on him. He went 105 yards for a touchdown, and I think he ended up beating us 50-7 that night.
It was all of about 5'6" tall. That's right.
110 pounds.
All right.
With it.
What's
Yes,
your
sir.
question,
Yes, sir.
Frankie?
But my question is this. In the interest of public safety and generate some revenue, have you ever considered having license plates on the front and the rear of automobiles?
Front and rear?
Yeah, it's not. I know that it's something that some states do, and quite honestly, I've been around state government for 10 years, and I don't know of any discussion we've ever had here about the pros and cons of it to have that license plate on both sides of the vehicle. And of course, I can see where there would be a revenue component to it. I would have to get with the Department of Public Safety and figure out whether there really is a valid public safety angle to it. But at this point, I can tell you, Frankie, it's not something that I've ever considered or had recommended to me, and we can certainly look at it. I would hope we don't just double the fees associated with license plates as a way to make to have more revenue for the state of Louisiana. But if there's a valid public safety reason for it, then perhaps we should consider it.
877-217-5757. We go to New Orleans, and Joey. Joey, you're on the air with Governor Edwards. Hi, Joey.
Good afternoon, Governor.
Hi, Joey. Good to have you.
So I have a question no one seems to be able to answer. Living in New Orleans, not in a city that's
All right. Let's try you again.
Peter Jet.
Go ahead, Joey.
All day long, we have fighter jets flying so close above the house. They shake the house. They set off fire alarms. This happens all days of the
Okay, what about
Well, Joey, I'm sure that the jets you're talking about are coming out of the Belle Chase Naval Air Station. And the fact of the matter is, they're integral to our national defense. They also are training in order to scramble, because that's one of the places they scramble fighter jets. If we have an aircraft approaching our airspace that doesn't identify itself and might pose a threat, they go up and intercept those aircraft. And so I understand that on occasion it might be inconvenient or set off an alarm, but I would not be in favor of trying to curtail their training. And every airman has to have so many hours in the seat flying in order to remain current on their qualifications and that sort of thing. So, and maybe you were going somewhere else with the question, and the feedback didn't allow us to hear the entirety of what it was you were going to pose as a question. But I, having served in the armed forces myself, and knowing how important training is, I certainly don't want to interrupt their training, and some of their training has to be done low to the earth, and some of it not, and so it's not something that I would want to see them curtail if it's essential for our national defense and security.
All right, thank you for calling, Joey. And a reminder that when you do call, please turn your radio down. The feedback that we've been getting could be related to the radio in your background. So please do that, and we'll see if we can do better as we move along. 877-217-5757 is your number. And a question from Trevor in Hammond about the 67th Annual Gridiron Show. This is Saturday in Baton Rouge, and you will be front and center Friday and Saturday, by the way, but the governor will be on hands for the Saturday show. And I understand you have a special guest.
We do. Coach Ed Orgeron, the LSU Fighting Tigers football coach, is going to join us, and he'll be my special guest there, and I'm looking forward to it. It's always a good time, and it's a good cause. And you know, this is one of the longest running programs of its type in the country, and it's always a lot of fun if you can stand people making fun of you, and I can, because I don't take myself that seriously.
And you'll get a chance to rebut.
I do, and that's the most fun for me.
All right, Coach Ed Orgeron will be on hand, the head coach of the Fighting Tigers of LSU. You and he kind of came in about the same time, so
we did. And by the way, I've gotten to know him and really appreciate him. He's a true South Louisianan. Comes from South Lafourche Parish, and I had the great fortune of actually spending some time with his mother before the bowl game down in Orlando, and she's a sweet and delightful lady. Of course, then we weren't successful in that game, but I'm looking forward to a great year in 2018, and you know, it's going to be a difficult schedule. We've got Georgia coming here, for example, this year.
yeah, Georgia and Alabama.
Georgia and Alabama, but they're both in Baton Rouge at least. So those were the two teams that played for the national championship. We get them both in the same season. But I'm excited about it. I know that Coach Orgeron loves his team. He loves the class that he just recruited, and his enthusiasm is infectious. And so I hope that his team and all the people around the state of Louisiana are as excited as he is.
Robert in Franklin, good afternoon. Robert, you're on the air with Governor Edwards.
How you doing, Governor?
Robert, I'm doing fine, thank you.
Great. Between property tax and local taxes, small rural areas such as mine are hurting. The cost of living here is high, and I understand the budget problems facing the state. If we must tax, can you support a sales tax over other taxes so families can choose if they can afford to pay higher sales tax versus imposed taxes?
Well, Robert, thank you very much for calling in. You know, the property taxes in Louisiana are all benefiting local government. The state doesn't collect any property tax in the state of Louisiana, and that's unlike most of the states in the country where the state government does participate in that revenue. Now, with respect to a sales tax, as you probably know, in order to address the $2 billion shortfall in my first full fiscal year, we did support, and the legislature did enact a fifth penny of sales tax, so it was one extra penny. I am prepared to accept a portion of that penny in order to solve our problem going forward. I wouldn't want to keep the entire penny, and there's some other things that we ought to do, and we ought to take those other measures from the legislative created task force recommendations, all of which are about adopting best practices from around the country, but creating more fairness, stability, and predictability in our tax code, where we reduce tax expenditures because we spend through the tax code and we can reduce that spending, but we can also do some common sense things like every penny of sales tax that we collect should have the same base. We shouldn't have 160 exemptions from the sales tax, for example. I would not touch the constitutional exemptions, which mean that we don't pay sales tax in Louisiana on groceries, we don't pay them on residential utilities, and we don't pay them on pharmaceuticals that you buy at the drugstore. So I can keep some portion of the fifth penny as part of the answer to the cliff. I think that answers your question, but there are a number of other things that we need to do as well. But my plan is to as best we can, replace $994 million of the expiring revenue, and the expiring revenue equals $1.38 billion. And part of this is going to be realized, we believe, because of revenue that we will get just based on what the Congress did in December of last year with their tax cut bill. That's going to produce some of the revenue that we need going forward, and it would do it through additional income tax collections, because we're one of 3 or 4 states in the entire country that have a deduction for federal tax liability. As that federal tax liability goes down, so does the deduction. So that would solve part of the problem.
Bill in Lafayette. Hi, Bill. You're on the air with Governor Edwards.
Governor Edwards, thank you for taking my call.
Thank you, Bill.
I have a little bit of bias in my question for you, as I'm a registered nurse. I have a concern regarding the public-private partnership with the state hospitals.
Yes, sir.
And how we're going to cover that if the private partnerships drop out. And the second part of that is, how are we going to address graduate medical education funding in the event that those entities withdraw from the agreements as they're written now?
Well, first of all, it is a great question, Bill, and it's one of the things that I am most concerned about. One of the reasons why I really pressed so hard to fix the cliff last year in the fiscal session, and then again this year in the special session that we had last month, because what I know is each of my first 2 years as governor, we've reduced funding for our private partners. We were able to get them to maintain their partnership with us, but last year it got increasingly hard to make that happen. Right now, based on the amount of general fund revenue that is being lost if we don't fix the cliff, I can tell you it's going to be extremely hard to retain all of our partner hospitals. And they are integral, not just to providing health care to the indigent. And by the way, not just the indigent. As you know, Bill, these hospitals provide health care to everyone, whether they're private pay, Medicare, Medicaid, or if they're completely uninsured. But they also are integral to graduate medical education. And so this would have far-reaching, long-term, very adverse impacts to the state of Louisiana. My commitment, if we fix the cliff at $994 million, is that we would fund our partner hospitals without a reduction in funding this year. We would hold them at the same level of funding next year that starts July 1st as we have this year. I think that's incredibly important for our state so that we can stabilize and move forward. And we shouldn't have to revisit these contracts every single year. And so we need to stabilize, create a new structure that grows with the economy, and then reap the benefits that come from that. And, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, everything that the state engages in. But your question is one of the things that really does keep me up at night, because I do worry about our ability to keep our partner hospitals engaged across the state of Louisiana if, in fact, we don't fix the cliff.
For the third consecutive year, you are pushing for an increase in the minimum wage in our state. Is this the year?
Well, I hope so. We should have done it 2 years ago. We got a minimum wage of $7.25. It's been the same for about 8 years now, and I just don't believe anybody thinks $7.25 is a fair, adequate, meaningful wage for an hour's worth of work. And what we know is more women than men typically have minimum wage jobs, and a great number of these women have children at home. And if we want to do something meaningful about attacking our child poverty rate, which is one of the highest in the nation, this is something that we can do. And I'm not one of those individuals who advocates for $15 an hour, but I think over 2 years we can go to $8.50. It's what they do in Arkansas. Walmart doesn't pay anybody less than $8.50, for example. We should be able to do this, and it's supported by the vast majority of the people of our state.
We'll go back to the phone lines, but Scott, a listener, asks about the industrial tax exemptions and how much of a culprit is that in managing the state budget? Is that a factor?
Well, it is, but it's indirect. As I mentioned to Robert a while ago, who called in from Franklin, the property tax doesn't come to the state of Louisiana. It doesn't go to our treasury, but it does go to local government. And one of the things I did when I became governor is because the industrial tax exemption exempts property taxes that would otherwise go to local government, I wanted local government to have a seat at the table to decide whether and to what extent those exemptions would be granted. And so now, for the first time in our state's history, you have local government participating in that process. And by the way, that's how it works in other states as well. And so they can decide for themselves whether they want that exemption granted or not. The other thing we did is we tied it to we tied it to job creation and job retention, and we're trying to make sure that it's limited to manufacturers, which is what the constitutional provision requires. And with respect to those exemptions that have already been granted, I think Scott had a question about that. But once they're granted, there's a contract that protects those exemptions. And I wouldn't want to go back in time and revisit contracts we've already granted. First of all, I don't think it's legal. But second, we want to have a business climate that affords stability and predictability. And with respect to something like a tax exemption, there needs to be certainty. So we would never go back and revisit those that have already been granted. The question is, what do you do going forward? We've already made some changes there. So, for example, rather than manufacturers getting up to 10 years at 100% exemptions on their property taxes, they can get the first 5 years at up to 100% and then no more than 3 additional years at no more than 80%. So it brings companies onto the tax rolls just a little bit sooner so that they can contribute to the costs of running that government and providing fire and police services, transportation, education, and those other critical things that our parishes provide.
877-217-5757. Each year, the company that I'm affiliated with, the Louisiana Radio Network, is part of the Louisiana Agriculture Hall of Distinction ceremony. And tomorrow night in Baton Rouge, Margie Jenkins, 96 years old, will become the first female inductee. You know this person.
I know Margie very well. She lives out east of Amite, and she's got a nursery, Jenkins Nursery, out on Highway 16 as well, east of Amite, out closer to Dummy Line Road. And she is a real fixture in that industry, and I'm so glad that they are recognizing her. I actually filmed something that will play at that ceremony. But she is a special lady. She's not just 96 years old. Margie Jenkins goes to work, and she works hard all of her life. Oh, yeah. Well, the last time I saw her, and the last time I was at the nursery, which wasn't that long ago. So, she is a special lady, and everybody in the area knows Miss Margie, and we have tremendous respect for her for all that she's done over the years.
And she's been getting a lot of publicity. I saw something in Washington, D.C. newspaper in San Francisco. A lot of people know about Margie Jenkins now. And we go back to the phone lines. Joe in Ruston. Joe, good afternoon. You're on Ask the Governor. Hi, Joe.
Hello, Governor.
Hi, Joe.
Joe Reeves in Ruston.
Yes, sir.
I got one question. You got such a mess in the Department of Corrections that you've been working on cleaning up.
But there have been some moves in the Department of Corrections since you became governor.
Well, there have been a number of moves, and a number of folks have retired and so forth. And And I will tell you, I'm not sure, Joe, what you're getting at, but Jimmy's leadership in that department through multiple years of significant budget cuts and all of the challenges that poses to the Department of Corrections in terms of trying to be able to pay correctional officers enough to keep them on the force and not have that high turnover rate, making sure that we were able to successfully implement criminal justice reforms modeled after other Southern conservative states and focusing on nonviolent, non-sex offenders. I mean, he led that effort. He presided over a task force for 2 years that did the most comprehensive study in our state's history and one of the most comprehensive reviews anywhere in the country. So Joe, I don't accept your characterization of Secretary LeBlanc, and I will tell you he's done good work. Now, a lot of things that have happened in the department happened with other individuals who are gone and have been gone for quite a while. In fact, for the most part, before I ever became governor. But in any event, I do appreciate you calling in, Joe, but I just can't accept your characterization.
Scott in Fenton. Hi, Scott. You're on the air with Governor John Bel Edwards. Scott, are you there?
Yes.
Hi, Scott. This is
Good afternoon, Governor.
Yes, sir. Good to have you.
I'm calling in regards to the medical cannabis bills that are going through the House, specifically 274, 579, and 611. I'm just curious what your viewpoints are on these bills.
Well, first of all, I support medical marijuana. Now, I'm going to have a hard time expanding the list of ailments for which marijuana can be prescribed before we ever even get to the point where we have medical marijuana on hand in those 10 pharmacies that are going to be licensed to distribute it. And so I am not in favor at this point in time of expanding the list of ailments. And if we ever get there, it will be after we've implemented the laws that are currently on the books, and we will only expand it based on scientific evidence that it's an effective treatment. And I believe, and I didn't come here with those bills in my hand, but I believe the bills that you just mentioned, 274, 579, and 611, are in that direction. But Scott, if you're still on, give your name and information to Tucker, and we'll take a look at those bills. And if there's something else, I mean, and I hate to give you this answer, but there are 1,500 or so bills filed between the House and the Senate right now. And I would have to take a look at them and then give you a call back or have someone call you to give you a more precise answer.
Victor in Baton Rouge. Hi, Victor. You're on the air with Governor John Bel Edwards.
Thank you very much for taking my call. Governor, first I'd like to commend you and your administration for the forthright manner by which you're addressing the problems of the state. But my question is, what steps are currently being taken to ensure the integrity of our electoral system in Louisiana?
Well, Victor, thank you very much for the call, and I appreciate the compliment. As you know, the elections in Louisiana are run by the Secretary of State. I can tell you I have confidence in his office and in the elections division to make sure that we are doing what we can as a state, but also working with our federal partners, because I think it's become increasingly clear that states have been targeted with respect to either individuals or governments overseas who are trying to influence our elections by hacking into our computer systems. And we do have computers in terms of our machines here in Louisiana for these elections. But working with the FBI and our federal partners, I'm confident that they are doing what is required, or at least what they can do at the moment. And I believe that based on briefings that I've had through the National Governors Association, that the federal government does take this threat seriously and is deploying some resources. Now, reasonable people might be able to disagree as to whether those efforts are as robust as they ought to be, given the nature of the the threat that's out there, and not just the threat going forward, but now what we seem to have evidence of going back at least to the 2016 election, with efforts coming out of Russia and perhaps elsewhere to influence our elections.
Mark in Metairie. Hi, Mark. You're on the air with Governor Edwards. Mark, you're on the air.
Hi, how you doing? This is Mark. First of all, I want to thank you. I can't thank you enough for expanding the Medicaid program in Louisiana. But I was a little concerned to hear that you were supporting possible Medicaid work requirements.
Yeah, well, Mark, thank you very much for the call. I said when I did it, and I did this on my first full day in office, January the 12th of 2016. Expanding Medicaid is just the right thing to do. And we have around 460,000 working poor who are covered through expansion. The overwhelming majority of those individuals we know work already. Others don't because they may be disabled, a few of them. Some of them actually are caretakers of children who are preschool, or maybe they're staying home with disabled loved ones and other things.
Governor, we do have to take a break.
Okay,
so
well,
let's
when we
pause.
come back, I'd like to finish
We
the
will.
response. Okay.
We're back after this short pause. And before we went to the break, Mark in Metairie was asking about the work requirements for Medicaid. Your thoughts as you were expanding on his thoughts.
First of all, the administration and by the way, the legislature in the special session worked on this as well. And the approach was not one that's going to be punitive in nature. The goal is not to kick people off of health care. It is to do community engagement and find out why someone who, by all appearances, should be able to work isn't working. Do they need to be connected to job opportunities? Do they need training? Do they need housing? You know, they might be homeless. But we know that health care is only a part of keeping someone healthy, and other things are beneficial, such as having a very stable life and so forth. But the goal was not to kick people off Medicaid. In fact, the bill would not have allowed someone to lose coverage as a result of this. By the way, it wouldn't make sense if you're trying to address our fiscal problems in the state of Louisiana, because if someone is uninsured, meaning they didn't have Medicaid, then we pay for 40% of the health care, and that 40% comes from the general fund. If someone has Medicaid, we don't pay more than 10 cents on the dollar, and that comes from a statutory dedication because we actually raised revenue specifically to meet our obligations on the non-federal share of the Medicaid expansion. And so what we have is a general fund problem. We're not trying to create more demand on the general fund. We certainly don't want people losing health care coverage, but we do want to have a robust community engagement process where we seek out these individuals. And by the way, it's a very small percentage of the people enrolled in Medicaid expansion who would even qualify for this type of engagement.
All right. Some questions offline. Craig says, can you please ask the governor why my car insurance is so expensive in relation to other states?
Well, I can't answer that question for him specifically. I don't know whether he's got a lot of speeding tickets.
He says he has no
accidents,
no tickets,
Okay.
good credit.
Yeah.
But he says his rates are high.
Well, you know, I've been in the legislature for 8 years before becoming governor, so I've been in state government for 10 years, and there have been a litany of reasons for this, one of which has to do with having too many substandard roads, because you have a lot of claims for damage to cars that have nothing to do with accidents, for example. And then you have some people believe that when we got rid of the rating commission, that rates increased too much as a result of that, and other people believe that we're not doing enough to regulate insurers. And so I don't know the particular answer to this question, but it is something that I hear about quite often. But Craig, I hope it's not because you have speeding tickets and have a lot of claims in your past.
All right. Here's one from Aaron with an E asking about Mississippi passing a bill to prevent abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. I know Senator Milkovich has a similar bill pending in Louisiana. Your thoughts about this legislation?
Well, as people know, or I guess should know, or will know, I am very much a pro-life individual when it comes to matters of the unborn, and not just the unborn, however. We were just talking about Medicaid expansion. The same Catholic Christian faith that informs my views on abortion also tell me that Medicaid expansion is the right thing to do. They're both pro-life, one for the unborn and the other for the born. And oddly enough, even though my position is informed by the same faith, one of those positions is deemed to be on the conservative side of things, and the other on the liberal side, the progressive side. But it remains to be seen whether that bill will make its way through the process. I would be inclined to sign it if it hits my desk. But I have not yet had any conversations with Senator Milkovich or any other legislators or any other interest groups about that particular bill.
Desiree in Metairie. Hi, Desiree. You're on with Governor Edwards. Desiree? Okay, let's put Desiree on hold, try to get her back. And while we're doing that, we'll go to Mark in Baton Rouge. Hello, Mark.
Yes, Governor, the money the state spends is a lot. And I was wondering if you would ever consider asking the state employees to send in their suggestions on how we could cut state spending to Commissioner of Administration Jay Darden.
Mark, that's a good question. In fact, we do that all the time. We survey our departments and we look for ways that we can be more efficient. The truth is we should always strive to be more efficient and to eliminate any waste that's out there. And whether you're running record surpluses or record deficits, it doesn't matter. And I can tell you there have been a number of efforts over the years to go to the agencies, talk to individual employees, and get their suggestions on how we can be more efficient in delivering state services. And many of those suggestions have been incorporated into the way we do business. I will talk to Jay and see the last time that we did that in a robust way and try to find ways that we can be more efficient. I'm not one of those people, however, who believe that if we just cut out waste, fraud, and abuse, we're going to have all of the revenue that we need in order to adequately fund our critical priorities without trying to resolve the fiscal cliff. And people who make those statements, I think, box themselves into a corner, and because there's just never that level of efficiencies to be obtained. But we strive to become more efficient in every aspect of state government, and I will have this conversation with Jay the next time I see him, so that if he has not solicited those ideas recently, he'll do so again.
Jennifer in Metairie. Hi, Jennifer. You're on the air with Governor Edwards.
Hi. First of all, I would like to say that I really appreciate the job you're doing here in Louisiana, and that you are quite a breath of fresh air for our state. My question has to do with teacher salaries, specifically in Jefferson Parish, which is where I work as a middle school teacher. In November, we had an election to raise a millage that would have given the teachers and other support staff a raise, and it failed by fewer than 500 votes. In January, they had a special meeting at the school board, which I attended, and 6 out of the 9 school board members voted against us getting a chance to have that millage go to vote again.
Yeah, Jennifer, first of all, thank you very much for calling in, and I really appreciate the fact that you are an educator and that you're devoting your life to educating our children and preparing them for success here in Louisiana. Teacher pay is obviously something that's critically important because we want to attract and retain the very best people that we can to put in that classroom with our children who are going to do the best job teaching them. I will tell you, you were talking primarily about a local effort, and hopefully you in Jefferson Parish will be successful in having that matter reconsidered because it's a partnership between the local government and the state government. And some parishes do better than others. Some school districts do better than others. My goal as governor is going to be make sure that the state does better. We have not granted very many increases to cover inflation to the Minimum Foundation Program, the MFP, which is our funding formula for K through 12 education. I think there's only been 2 full increases over the last decade, something like that. Half of those increases do go to teacher pay. So I'm going to let you all at the local level sort it out for yourselves, but my commitment at the state level is to stabilize our budget and find a way to increase the MFP to account for inflation. And if we do that, half of that $70 million or so, which is what a 2.75% of the MFP would be, half of that would go to teacher pay raises, which would help, because I know that you all have lost significant ground over the last 10 years. We went from paying our teachers at the Southern Regional average to not being able to say that that's the case in Louisiana, and we need to do better. I'll focus on the state, and I'll leave it to you and others to focus on Jefferson Parish and the other individual districts.
Now, I have a letter from Representative Lance Harris sent to Jay Darden, the Commissioner of Administration, asking for a Medicaid payment. The state makes 12 of them a year, an additional one to be made this year to address the budget issues for next year. Has there been a response to this?
Yeah, we did respond, and Representative Harris is suggesting that we take some of the excess dollars, because we are actually producing revenue ahead of the forecast for the current year, and then use that in order to retire the 13th payment. Now, we need to revisit the 13th payment. In order to meet a mid-year deficit in the fall of 2015, Governor Jindal's proposal was to take one of the 12 payments to our managed care organizations and just kick that payment into the next fiscal year. That's about $141 million. That happened, and so they only made 11 payments that year, and so we've actually had an additional payment that we need to make. We've not yet retired that payment, and so the proposal would be that you take excess dollars and retire the payment. Now, that would be fine. It's the second part of Representative Harris's proposal that I find objectionable, and that is that we would then only make 11 of the 12 payments in next fiscal year. Well, that's a gimmick. That is not paying our bills. That is deliberately setting out to not fix our problems, and it's more of the can kicking that we saw over the 8 years before I became governor, and that's just not acceptable. The other part of that is a real problem is we actually have to reprocure, so there'll be a new contract with our managed care organizations in December of 19, and we have to be current at the time that happens.
Well, thank you for joining us for Ask the Governor. Thank you, Governor Edwards, for the 24th program. You'll be back April 18th.
Thank you.